You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 11th of January. A white British minority in 4 towns and cities in the UK. Saturday sees name changes for wards in Tower Hamlets. Met Office releases revised global temperature predictions. Barbarity at the Centre Pompidou. Spanish Pamplona's locksmiths boycott evictions. Nick Griffin MEP, who today is covering the Condemns midterm review and much more. Egypt's new constitution prepares the way for an Islamic caliphate. Kenya's Wildlife Service says it is pursuing elephant family killers. Thought for the day, diversity versus genocide. And finally, real snake on a plane. UK news. White Brits are now in a minority in 3 more UK towns and cities, a report reveals today. Soaring immigration has sent their numbers plunging below 50% in the city of Leicester and the towns of Luton and Slough. The figures follow last month's revelation that for the first time white Brits form less than half London's population, 45%. The percentage calling themselves white British is at 35 in Slough, Berkshire and 45 in Luton Beds and Leicester. No ethnic group is in the majority in any of the 3. The Manchester University study says the figure for Birmingham may fall below half within 7 years. The overall white population tops 50% in Leicester and Luton when Eastern European and Irish communities are added. The latest analysis of 2011 census data in England and Wales, published today by the University of Manchester researchers, has revealed the first local authorities outside London where no ethnic group is in the majority. The research by the university's Centre on Dynamics of Ethnicity, CODE, shows the towns of Slough and Luton and the city of Leicester are now plural. Birmingham could join them in the next 7 years. The team, who also find that 23 of London's 33 boroughs are plural, says towns and cities labelled by politicians as segregated are in reality the most diverse. In the 3 local authorities, substantial numbers of Irish, Eastern European and other white populations have rendered their white British populations, though still large, as minorities for the first time. However, the white British population is still the largest in every local authority except Tower Hamlets and Brent, where it is the second biggest. In addition, the research was funded by COD and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. There is an ongoing campaign to change the names of famous wards in Tower Hamlets. The deadline for public objections to the dropping of Banglatown from Spitalfields and Banglatown and St Dunstan's from the proposed new Stepney wards is on Monday. Do please write to the Local Government Boundary Commission at reviews@lgbce.org.uk if you have strong views on either. While dropping Banglatown was a Tory proposal, removing the name of St Dunstan's was a Labour idea. The current ward name is St Dunstan's and Stepney Green. The final Labour proposal, which has been provisionally accepted by the Commission, is Stepney East and Stepney West. However, I understand that Labour councillors had actually wanted to call one of the wards St Dunstan's and Shah Jahal. Shah Jahal, named after Shah Jahal, who is credited with the spread of Islam in Bengal, is the name of the popular but rather ramshackle mosque in Duckett Street, which over the past few years has also been the centre of feuding over various management and funding arrangements. A Nationalist spokesperson commented, "You see, this is what the media do not print or broadcast, the very gentle but firm introduction of Islam to these boroughs. Soon Sharia will be sliding in and all the road names will be in Urdu or worse. It has begun." Met Office releases revised global temperature predictions showing planet is not rapidly heating up. The Met Office has admitted that global warming has stalled. Officials say that by 2017 temperatures will not have risen significantly for nearly 20 years. They concede that previous forecasts were inaccurate and have come under fire for attempting to bury bad news by publishing the revised data on Christmas Eve. A World at 8 writer stated, All very well, but facts are facts. The polar ice caps are melting fast, and humans deforesting vast areas of land will affect our climate in coming years. It isn't all one factor, right or wrong. As usual, the world ignores the grey area in between, the pro-global warmers and the sceptics. European news. The gradual degradation of France has no limits. A French artist intends to kill animals in the Centre Pompidou. Animal rights activists are demanding that this bloody show be banned. The French-Algerian artist Adel Abdessenemed plans to end his exhibition in this museum by torturing animals. The artist of Algerian origin will bring a cow, a calf, a pig, a goat and a sheep to the centre, which is one of the most famous museums in Paris, and smash them to death with a hammer to the sound of heavy metal music. We have to stop this absurd show from the point of view of the true artists and those who appreciate art. Torturing animals is not art, but cruelty, and humans should not do this. This show would be an insult to the feelings of many people who defend animals, says petition addressed to Cultural Minister Aurélien Philippiti. This appeal to stop this dreadful crime has received 25,500 signatures in 3 weeks at the civil organisation's website avaaz.org, but 30,000 are needed. The animal rights activists will demonstrate next to the museum. In spite of the important prestige and international recognition, many have doubts about the artistic value of Adel Abdessemed. Some years ago, one of his exhibitions was closed in San Francisco, 5 days after opening due to massive protests and threats. France has recently seen scandals involving animals. This week, the famous actress Brigitte Bardot declared that she will apply for the Russian citizenship if 2 elephants in the Lyon Zoo that are ill with tuberculosis are killed because of fears that the illness could be passed on to humans. The World to Date reporter comments, "The poor elephants probably got it from an immigrant worker anyway, not the other way round. As for the so-called art show beating animals to death, he's got the idea from the Eid celebrations, where even small camels publicly have their throats cut by any passing Muslim, then lie in the street and bleed to death. When will the Western world forbid this sort of cruelty in its own countries? This man needs to be put out of our misery." Madrid. The Assembly of Professional Locksmiths in the Spanish city of Pamplona, the capital of Navarre, will no longer aid authorities in evicting delinquent homeowners in Spain. In Spain, locksmiths are called in by the courts to change the locks on a home once its occupants have been evicted. The locksmiths say they would not assist in evictions that led to at least 9 suicides over the past few months, and which have affected 400,000 people since the economic crisis began. "It will affect us economically, but we have our dignity," Assembly President Iker de Carlos told reporters. From now on they will have to call locksmiths outside Navarre. What you see on television is different from when you go there. You know you're helping to kick people out of their home, to stay on top of a perpetual debt that you will have to keep paying. We know that we will not start a revolution, but we want to serve as an example to Navarre society. Locksmiths throughout the country are evaluating the Pamplona action as an example to follow. "We are professionals, but we are people first," Spanish Federation of Locksmiths President David Omaquer told El País newspaper. "We can no longer participate in these terrible events without having a say." Meanwhile, I hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP.
Well, the break was welcome, and I hope that you also had a good Christmas. But it's good to be back on World at 8. Our audience is growing steadily, and my special thanks are due to everyone who sends on links and recommendations to friends to help us win new listeners. One useful trick that I've heard of supporters doing is to go on the comments section of newspapers and put links to World at 8 on them. Don't waste time with moderated columns on controversial issues, as their censors will just delete them. Don't worry about relevance. A link in a gardening column will get seen by readers just as easily as one beneath a report on Muslim grooming, and it's far more likely to be published and to stay up. Many thanks, and do let me know of your successes. If everyone makes a point of doing something, we'll get a lot more done. And we need to because, as I'm sure you already know, the demographic shift in Britain means that we only have a limited amount of time left in which to turn things around. It's not only true about immigration, Islam and demography, of course. It's also the case in many other areas. For example, the continuing deindustrialisation of our economy thanks to free trade and the crushing burden, £18 billion a year, of the Climate Change Act, the longer this goes on, the harder it will be for us to rebuild British industry. Or the destruction of more and more of our best farmland and loveliest countryside by housing developers. Once the bulldozers and cement mixers have done their work, our green and pleasant land cannot be undeveloped and restored. So the longer we're ruled by a gang of crooks in the pockets of the big corporate developers, the less of our Britain there will be left for us to fight to save. This aspect of our struggle has been highlighted in the Condem's mid-term review proposals to deal with the housing crisis issued this week. The problem is that the crisis that their plans are intended to deal with is not the crisis of millions of our people being unable to get or afford a decent home. Oh no, if they wanted to deal with that, the first thing they'd do would be to stop immigration. To the Tories in particular, the key crisis in housing is that the fact that the banksters' crisis threatens the profits of the cartel of big building firms that give them more than £1 million a year. That's what's behind the much vaunted proposals of Conservative high-flyer Nick Bowles and his policy exchange think tank. If that sounds harsh or cynical, consider this. These people are always banging on about the wonders of the free market, but we don't hear a peep from them about the fact that the big corporate developers are sitting on a hoard of more than 400,000 unused building plots. What kind of free market is that? They are literally rationing building land in order to keep prices artificially high and to create an artificial shortage which they and their political puppets then use to justify scrapping the Greenbelt planning restrictions which stand between them and even bigger profits from building high-class residential units in some of our most beautiful countryside. The solution is simple. I caused a considerable behind-the-scenes stir in the housing industry by proposing it this week. A simple 3% unused utility levy every 2 years on the value of all building plots which have had unused planning permission on them for more than 18 months. At a stroke, this would break the big boys' corrupt cartel, forcing them either to get building new homes or to sell off plots to smaller firms who will. The price of both building land and therefore new homes would drop to more affordable levels, helping young families to buy their own houses. It would also bring in valuable extra income to local authorities to plough into renovating older rental properties, rather than leaving them to run down so they can be demolished and replaced by more private yuppie developments, which is the norm at present. That's the sensible, practical nationalist proposal. Contrast that to the Tory developers one announced this week. Build all over the Greenbelt with powers to blackmail local communities into supporting developments by telling them that unless they approve them, they won't get badly needed facilities such as health centres. That's not a policy, it's blackmail. The Coalition's other bright idea on housing is to make £200 million available for developers to borrow to fund the building of private rental units. Yet again we see the curious phenomenon of fanatically pro-free market Tory policy geeks doing a 180-degree U-turn on their principles when they stand in the way of added profits for their corporate money-bag cronies. 200 million of public money pumped into an artificial and unnecessary subsidy for big developers will only lead to higher prices for building land, something that will make it even harder for young buyers to get a foot on the property ladder. Of even more long-term significance, the proposal marks a huge shift in housing policy because, I repeat, the properties built in this way would be the core of private rent-for-profit empires. This from the party which, under these young pups' supposed idol Margaret Thatcher, had the ambition of widening owner occupation on the grounds that, since private property is a foundation stone of freedom, independence and social stability, it should be spread more widely. And, just as the Tories are turning their backs on their political heritage and their core constituency with this new policy, so we can see in their supine acceptance of this shift to private rental as the basis of housing policy, the parallel betrayal by Labour of their own traditions and voters. Because Labour was the party that created council housing, the original affordable homes that got the working class out of privately owned rat-rented slums and into affordable Parker Morris standard homes under local democratic control. The answer to this Conservative corruption and Labour betrayal has to be nationalism, where housing policy is determined by the need to provide affordable and good quality housing for every British citizen, mainly through a mixture of private ownership and council housing. Well-regulated privately owned rental property has a role to play, of course, but it should not be promoted as the answer to Britain's housing problems, as an excuse for big developers to get even richer. In summary, the way to restore decent housing as a standard for the British people is to stop immigration, radically reform the banking system, end hoarding, provide tax breaks to encourage the upgrading of privately owned rental properties, stop creeping privatisation, and restore a Parker Morris standard council house building programme. On a related subject, because it also involves houses and injustice, I've heard from a number of constituents whose elderly parents are being forced to sell their homes to pay for nursing care. This, despite working and paying tax into the system all their lives. A record number of over 24,500 pensioners were forced to do so this last year alone, with the average sale only paying for 3 years and 8 months of care before the money's all gone. People who worked hard all their lives in order to be able to pass on their much-loved home or a serious amount of cash to their children are now dying as paupers. David Cameron pledged last year to end this scandal by introducing the key recommendation of the Dilnot report, which was to have a £35,000 cap on what anyone has to pay towards their nursing care. Whether that's good enough is in a way irrelevant here. What matters is that Cameron promised to take action, but has broken that promise. Yet another one. For there was no word about this in the Condem's midterm review, which earlier spin had said would include this much-needed protection for the elderly and their families. The Dilnot cap would have cost £1.7 billion, which the Condems now claim they can't afford. Well, they, and the Labour opposition, should have thought of that before they agreed to blow more than 10 times that amount each year in a farcical war against carbon, the most important fertiliser Mother Nature ever invented. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that I've got a small but very competent group of legal advisors working on a set of thoroughly practical things which we can advise and even help people to do in order to protect themselves and their loved ones from this family tragedy, and to help deprive our criminal masters of revenue while they're at it. Watch this space. These important and very popular subjects are covered in the latest Freedom, which is out shortly. If you don't already do so, please take out a subscription, because it's only by spreading the word about such things and our positive answers to them that we will gradually build the power-winning machine we need to turn our vision of a better Britain into reality. Finally, I can't resist a mention of the thoroughly bizarre move by the BBC stooge Nigel Farage this week to offer a coalition with Labour in 2015. While I can understand, though I don't necessarily believe, his current claim that he will never do a deal with Cameron, Farage's suggestion of a deal with Miliband is a piece of astounding political stupidity. Vote Labour, get UKIP is likely to be a reality in any case if the BBC plan to use UKIP not just to block the British National Party, but also to split the Conservative vote works as well as it's doing at present. But it's one thing to put Labour back into power by accident, and another entirely to put Miliband into number 10 deliberately with a coalition. How many middle-class votes has that just lost UKIP? Rather a lot, I hope. So, on that happy note, till this time next week, remember, freedom isn't free, but the price is always worth paying.
Thank you, Nick, and it's good to have your dulcet tones back with us again. World News. Egypt's new constitution prepares the way for an Islamic caliphate, according to the acting leader of Coptic Catholics, who is among 3 bishops to condemn the document as a fundamental attack on human rights. The history of Christianity in Egypt dates back to the visit of the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary and Joseph to that land, Matthew 2. It predates any claimed Islamic history in that country. To the Christians who live in Egypt, the history of the Christian Church is the history of Egypt. The evangelist Mark brought the gospel of Jesus Christ to Egypt in 61 AD and planted the church there deep in the soil of that land of martyrs and saints. Egypt has a proud, long, unbroken and vital Christian heritage. We must pray for, stand with and defend Christians in Egypt as hostility towards the Christian faith grows under the Morsi regime. The majority of Christians in Egypt are Coptic Orthodox. The very word Copt comes from an early Greek name for Egypt. Christianity in Egypt have a long and holy history. In addition, there is a strong, ancient and devout community of Coptic Catholic Christians. The relationship between the two churches is strong and growing stronger under the persecution which they face together. Kenya's Wildlife Service says it's pursuing a gang of poachers they suspect of killing an entire family of 11 elephants. Saturday's killings took place in the Tsavo National Park, Kenya's largest single continuous ecosystem, which is home to some 13,000 elephants, and it is the most barbaric poaching incident recorded in that country. The poaching gang is believed to be made up of 10 people, and their quarry was being hunted by rangers on foot and from the air. Kenya is amongst several African states that are taking a more aggressive stance against this poaching, as they're trying to combat the surge in demand from mainly China for ivory at any price. Despite a long-standing ban on the international trade, ivory from elephants is often smuggled to Asia for use in ornaments, whilst rhino horns are used in traditional medicine. This shows the great lengths these criminal cartels are ready to go to get ivory. It's really tragic, Kenya Wildlife Service spokesman Paul Udo told Reuters news agency. A world-to-date writer comments, "No punishment is bad enough for these men. They are not starving, they are just greedy and stupid. If they are killed whilst being arrested, their bodies should be hung up as an example to other poachers, or the message will simply not get through. The Chinese embassies in Africa should take some responsibility for their own greed in reparation for these killings and give money to the elephant and rhino orphanages." Thought for the day: diversity versus genocide. I'm wondering how far down the line we in the UK go before we realise that diversity is just another name for ethnic genocide. 2 items in the last 24 hours came as no greater surprise. There was a programme on generation rent, and this programme did not feature one single ethnic landlord, although it is well known that a very significant percentage of the buy-to-lets are bought by Asians in the UK. They only showed white couples both renting and prospective buyers, but did get just a little naughty in showing 2 obvious homosexuals who were starting a property portfolio. I almost fell off my seat to see not a single ethnic, not even a Pole, but of course this was intended, because to admit that our youngsters will be in hock to ethnic and foreign landlords for the rest of their lives must never be touched upon. The situation is dire for young white couples, and we can thank the banks, Labour governments and global greed. Not much comfort there, but the building societies should be made to lend with smaller deposits and make sure that people can pay back even when interest rates rise. It seems stupid that one has to pay a much larger sum of money to someone else just to rent, whilst a mortgage would be so much cheaper. We have not provided the right sort of advice and help to an entire generation of our own youth. We've all been too busy accommodating and paying for a generation of immigrant youth, and we've left our own behind. Second surprise came in a book by a well-known author of horror stories, and in it, of course, there are the bad guys in various ghostly forms, and just guess who. Well, Hitler's Imaginary Daughter by Unity Mitford, a colleague of Slobodan Milosevic, 2 old Nazis, one of which bore the name Brunnan, which is a mite away from Alois Brunner, ex-Nazi, currently in Syria, and whose son Egon I had my picture taken with in Singapore a very long time ago. And I'm only halfway through this book. Why do authors jump on this old and boring bandwagon? Are people still living in the 1930s? Well, they are as far as the far right and fascists go, but they are ignoring the socialist and liberal left encroachments in their own country. One look at that picture of the January sales in London and there was not one white face. Well, one, but that was probably Eastern European frantically scrabbling in the melee. So we have the media, the arts, the councils and the government, the education facilities, the medical facilities, and so much more gradually turning into the third world with all the terrible omens that entails. And it is our fault. The English are incapable of getting angry at anything other than the Germans and the upper classes. Germany didn't have to invade us, it left it to the Arabs and Indian subcontinent, and then they went for broke with the EU unemployable. But what goes around comes around, and Germany is inundated with Turkish Muslims, but has taken away the means to do anything about it. The West crowed over Serbia and Bosnia at all the awful things inflicted on just the Muslims, who of course never do anything wrong. The Allies embellished stories of the existing camps, which incidentally we British invented against the Boers in South Africa, and the Jews, although they suffered terribly, have been dining out on the last war for over 60 years. In doing so, we have taken the teeth from our British lion, because now, if anyone wanted to do anything other than send a huge amount of people on a luxury cruise over the Niagara Falls, we would not be allowed to do it. International condemnation would follow. Even now there are threats from Obama and Germany that if we leave the EU, we will not be so interesting to the US, and Germany will try and make sure we are financially ruined. Tough. Below is a short tale indicative of what we have to put up with now, even in areas not over-enriched. I no longer recognise the Britain I grew up in. From our European writer on a recent journey home. When I came out of the railway station at Stoke-on-Trent, as I have done countless times since my childhood, I made my way to the taxi rank and asked for Barlaston, a small village 5 miles away, where my parents began their married life. The taxi driver invariably registered a total blank. "I'm going to the Wedgwood factory." Blank. "You know, Wedgwood? Famous pottery?" Complete blank. Only when I produced a postcode and we could tap it into the sat-nav does the Asian taxi driver have any idea where we're going. And it certainly is not anywhere in the Britain of my boyhood. We might well have to fight to put the great back into Great Britain, and the irony of this is the fact that we will have to fight many of our own kind because of the negative effect that positive media lies have had on the last couple of generations of Brits. There is a science fiction book written many years ago on the invasion of a planet, and the only people left to fight were the old and the young, and yet they succeeded. Middle England, middle class and middle of the road, might as well be on another planet. Nothing seems to touch them, except the sudden lack of child benefit, or their wealthy pensioners having to give up a free heating allowance, which frankly is not much good in hot foreign climes. The loss of their country doesn't seem to impinge at all, which might be just as well. What you don't fear to lose, you might well do so, owing to sheer apathy. And apathy is a waste of a life, in my book. And finally, snakes on a plane. A passenger looked out of their window after an hour into a Qantas flight between Cairns in northern Queensland and the Papua New Guinean capital of Port Moresby on Thursday and saw a 3-metre-long amethystine python clinging to the wing. The poor darling had crawled onto the plane from the mangrove swamps that surrounded the airport in tropical Cairns. They can grow to as long as 28 feet. A crew member told Australian media that the initial reaction when the python's presence was first reported was, "You've got to be kidding." Qantas said in all seriousness that there was no impact on the safe operation of the aircraft due to the snake's presence, and the Bombardier Q400 was clear to resume flying after it landed in Port Moresby. Unfortunately for our slithery friend, the flight did not suit him, and he was found to be dead on arrival. Oh. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.